Hello, my name is Sarah Naimark and I'm Deputy Director of the Advisory Practice at Oxford Analytica. I'm joined today by Jo Ford, our Senior Analyst. Today we're launching Oxford Analytica's Business and Society Monitor, a quarterly update on the strategic implications of legal, societal, and regulatory factors on our clients' core interests. We see this as an important part of macro diligence across sectors and markets and believe this will be a key tool to help our clients stay abreast of these issues. Jo, you were fundamental in putting together this first edition. Why don't you give us an idea of some of the things that you were thinking about as you were putting it together?
Thanks, Sarah. Well, the monitor, as you said, is quarterly, and in the last quarter there have been a few events of significance. Three of them are sort of court cases, and they relate to the past in a sense, but they relate to the potential for legacy issues, both corporate and government, legacy human rights issues to come back in the future and affect reputation or operating environment of firms. So we've seen the British government settle its colonial era civil claim in relation to Kenya. We've seen a US decision on jurisdiction for Nigerian claimants for alleged corporate complicity in events in Nigeria. And we've seen the onset of long-building litigation related to gold miners in South Africa. So one of the things that we help clients with really is looking at some of these legacy human rights issues and the conditions or context in which they might re-emerge in some way that, as I said, that may affect their environment. Of course, the other thing in the last quarter that one can't look past at all is the tragic building collapse in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, which killed over 600 people, mainly garment sector workers. So that's prompted naturally reflection around the world. In this case, well, for our purposes, in terms of the relative responsibilities of governments, of the local private sector, i.e. the factory and building owners, and the foreign corporate actors who are involved in purchasing these garments. So around supply chain integrity used to talk here in terms of business responsibility. And what are the relative roles, and to what extent do corporates involved in global supply chains have some responsibility for the local government enforcement of local government regulations. And that really relates to something that we discuss in the monitor, which is to some extent an academic exercise, but in other ways a very practical exercise, which is how is it that some issues come within the mainstream corporate responsibility agenda, and by what processes, and how is it that some issues are issues of corporate non-responsibility? And importantly for clients, how might that change over time, so that an issue that initially appears to be outside the discourse, so to speak, of corporate responsibility can sometimes quite quickly come onto it. I know in your part of the business you look in the advisory part at some of these issues. Are they coming onto your agenda more directly?
Yeah, absolutely. Clients are very concerned. It's very front of mind for them. And I think one of the things you mentioned there, things that are just emerging now and developing now that could take a number of different paths. They want to know whether their strategy is sustainable against the way these expectations upon them as corporates might change over the years to come. One way we've been working on that is through our scenario analysis, which is a great way to look at how these forces and trends interact. All of our work is looking at the nexus of government, private sector, society, but with this angle, we're really looking at how these come together, interact with one another to form new kinds of possible futures that corporates are going to have to act in, be responsible in, and maintain their core commercial interests in. So we've been doing, for example, quite a lot of work around water, which you won't be surprised to hear is a core interest for a number of companies across sectors, of course, consumer goods, all the way to extractives, mining companies, energy companies. So what we try to do is look at the longer term trajectories of where these kind of trends are going, the trends that you'll be watching in the monitor, see how they might shape and whether the corporate strategy is sustainable against those factors. I know you're watching these as well. What sorts of other themes have been emerging in your analysis?
Well, there's all the traditional themes, I suppose, that come within what I mentioned, that rubric of corporate responsibility, and the wider sustainability debate related to innovation and change, both climate-induced change and innovation to take advantage of a changing demand for example, more carbon-friendly products. But then there are a number of sort of evolving niche areas, one of which we're pioneering around ideas of corporate diplomacy, corporate foreign policy. So helping clients using our network, I suppose, of sort of geopolitical and country and regional experts, helping corporate clients understand the circumstances, especially in fast-changing societies or ones that may be emerging from relative periods of diplomatic isolation, to understand some of the reputational and operational risks that may emerge where they are forced by a circumstance, by force of events, to present a position on an issue which is really more of a political or social issue, but in which their products or services or mere presence is inseparable.
The Arab uprisings are a good example of that, where a lot of corporates had to make a quick decision on what their policy would be, whereas if they had been able to put together something coherent and consistent ahead of time, they would have been more prepared to act within those jurisdictions.
That's right. It's about contingency. You mentioned scenario planning, so it's about contingency planning for such events and political insight, and insight in the political economy can help with that. But it's not necessarily restricted to a sort of risk-based approach. In other words, guarding against contingencies where the reputation may come into risk. It's also about enhancing, as an opportunity, one's brand. If one's a brand-exposed firm, it's about thinking of creative ways, for example, as I said, in a newly opening market, so to speak, to position oneself with core values that one's eventual consumers will find attractive because they relate to issues around society and politics. But of course, any corporate knows entry into those topics and explicitly engaging in those topics carries with it risk of forces that they may not be well prepared to deal with.
And those are the kind of forces we'll be watching in the Business and Society Monitor.
That's right.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
And thank you. We invite you to explore our business and society practice on our webpage, and hope to see you next week.